and welcome back to my channel. My name is Muriel, and in this video I will be doing a pretty big monthly reading wrap-up because I'm going to be wrapping up the months of November, December, and January all in this one video because yes, I'm aware it's been a bit more than a hot minute since I've been here. A few reasons for this. I worked pretty intensely on the second and final draft of my memoir in the month of December, and it sent me crashing straight into burnout, pretty severe burnout, and I had another pretty massive flare-up of depression, and so I was massively exhausted for a couple of months there and just wasn't able to do much of anything at all, especially not anything creative, and I couldn't even read really during the month of December. I only read like one book, I think, if I remember correctly. Hence the absence of content, wrap-ups, etc. So yes, I'm going to go over 3 months worth of reading, though like I said, I didn't read all that much considering. I think I'll be talking about 12 books in total. 12 books for 3 months is not even that much, for me at least. So that's the little explanation. I hope you've all been doing well. And well, I'll be first going through the non-fiction I read and then the fiction in simple chronological order, as I usually do. So I read and finished 2 things in the month of December 2022. The first thing was this. Budding is my favorite video game, written by Rosemary, Mosco. And this is just basically a small little compendium of cartoon type drawings. So I follow this nature artist on Instagram, and she specializes in doing cartoons about biology, environmentalism, naturalists, and I think what characterizes them is that they are cute, but also usually very informative and very funny, and of course you kind of get something extra out of it if you yourself are a, nature/biology nerd. And so I was so taken by her cartoons on Instagram that I was like, might she have published a little compendium of these? And as it so happens, yes, I think actually she's published 2, but I wanted to go for the first one she ever published, which is this one. So it's fairly short, as you can see, and yeah, it just contains a bunch of her cartoons. So it's things like this, about plants, animals and stuff. I enjoyed going through this, and there's some real little gems in there, so if you are a nature/biology nerd, I would, well, for one thing, highly recommend you check her out on Instagram, and then, maybe check out one of her publications. It was just kind of perfect in the sense that it was exactly what I wanted, so this was a very straightforward 10 out of 10 read for me, and I'm just happy to have this, in my collection of such little books. And then I read this literary, which is written by Taisia, Kitaiskaia and illustrated by Horan. And again, this is the compendium type of illustrated nonfiction book. It talks about female writers who, according to the authors of this book, are kind of witchy for XYZ reasons. And I liked it. This was an 8.5 out of 10 read for me. Basically, the formula is kind of like with the books by Rachel Ignatowski, Women in Science and Women in Art. Here would be women in literature, I guess. So you have an illustration of an author. Here we have Virginia Woolf. And then you get like these 3 very small lyrical, poetic paragraphs that reference the works of the author, and then a very short biographical vignette with recommendations as to what you should check out by said author. I appreciated the kind of poetry because it really weaves in imagery from the novels or essays or short stories of each of the female writers in this book. Unfortunately, you kind of have to be familiar with the works beforehand, and I wasn't familiar with most of the authors in this book. Now, on the one hand, I discovered new female writers from all over the world as well, so it's not just Western-centric or European-centric, but I didn't know most of them, so whilst I appreciated the poetry, I missed a lot of the references, and I would have enjoyed more biographical information and perhaps more straightforward information about the kind of writing each of these authors actually, did during their lifetimes. Like you get with something like Women in Science or Women in Art. I mean, it's the same basic idea, but here it's a bit more flowery, abstract, symbolic, whereas I would have liked more, just direct information. also minor quibble, but no Ursula K. Le Guin in here, and I was very, very sad about that, though there is Octavia E. Butler, and she definitely deserves to be in this book. There's also Virginia Woolf, Sappho, Mary Shelley, I think Audre Lorde is in there as well, and Shirley Jackson. So, I mean, there are authors in there that I knew of, but haven't read anything by, but they're also just authors I'd never heard of before. So, I mean, I learned stuff, and that's always a plus. Moving directly to January, the first book I finished this year was Gender Critical Feminism, written by Holly Lawford-Smith, though I technically read this over like a month and a half to 2 months because I kind of started it at the end of November, I'm pretty sure, and then just didn't continue because I was working on my memoir and then burnout and reading burnout, etc. So this, as you might have guessed from the title, deals with gender critical feminism. This is basically a theoretical overview of this specific sub-branch of feminism, and it was an excellent book. So far, all the books I've read dealing with this in some way or another have been excellent, so yay for me there. This is more of an academic text. I mean, it was published by Oxford University Press. Also, funny little anecdote, some people didn't want this to be published, and Oxford University Press told them to sod off. Much more politely, of course, but still, so yay for freedom of speech and publication. The author basically starts with a bit of a historical overview of feminism and then into radical / second wave feminism specifically, and then goes into how gender critical feminism kind of grew, developed out of that into what it is today. And then it kind of covers the things for which gender critical feminism is being criticized, not to say vilified by some people, i.e. sex work, principally prostitution and pornography, gender identity ideology, that's probably the most hot button topic, and then intersectionality. And so she presents her points both using like real world evidence, if that makes sense, and just concepts from philosophical analysis, and also from just the history of feminism, and references a lot of older, or I mean classical feminist theory and analysis, but also contemporary feminist analysis. Yeah, it's a brilliant overview, just thorough, complete. So this was a near perfect read. For me, this was a 9, yeah, solid 9 out of 10. So once again, if you have even a passing interest in this topic, this is an excellent reference. Quite rigorous, and yeah, it's definitely an academic text, but I mean, that's what I appreciated about it. Then I read this, Queens of the Wild, Pagan Goddesses in Christian Europe, an Investigation, written by Professor Ronald Hutton. I have read a book by Professor Ronald Hutton before a long time ago now called Triumph of the Moon, and that is a scholarly overview of neo-paganism, but really Wicca more specifically in the UK, where it came from, how it came to be developed, etc. And this is quite a niche publication about female-centric pagan survivals in Western European culture throughout the Middle Ages, the early modern era, and up until, the 20th century, and then today. So by this, I mean that the author takes a look at 4 female figures and 1 male figure at the end. It's kind of a little addendum, who were for a long time by some scholars considered to be survivals of pagan religion throughout the era of Christianity, or I mean the dominion of Christianity in Western Europe. So he takes a look at the figure of Mother Earth, the fairy queen, the queen of the night, so involved in the wild hunt, and then the Cailleach, from Irish and Scottish folklore, popular mythology, if you will. His investigation is to see whether those figures are in fact remnants of pagan religion that managed to survive within a Christian cultural context, or if they were something a bit different. This was very interesting. I mean, I love this shit. I just kind of remembered how much I love this topic of like mythology, folklore, pagan religion, female-centric religion, whilst I was reading this book, I was just feeling the good feels, which that's how it feels when you have a special interest and you're tapping into that. So that was neat for me. So I'll already say this now, do check it out if you have an interest in this specific overlap of topics like folklore, mythology, ancient religion, etc. Or I mean, just religion in general and how it interacts with culture and folklore and stuff. But it's a very academic text once again, but not engaging, or I mean, I found it engaging, but maybe less generally engaging like gender critical feminism was, because it's a bit dry in places, and at times I thought the author focused too much on how folklore is studied rather than the actual folklore itself. I mean, Professor Hutton talks a lot about different figures in folklore studies or mythology studies, religion studies. So at times it was just a wee bit less interesting to me. The main general idea is that there is a distinction between a survival of paganism, so an actual pagan religion continuing to exist within a Christian culture in Western Europe throughout history, which, I mean, in any case, that was kind of a popular theory for a while, but I knew that it'd been basically debunked. Like, there was never a religion of witches during the Middle Ages or the early modern era, so I don't know if that's, well, yeah, I'm sure there's still people who believe that, but I was aware it had been debunked. So he makes a distinction between that idea, which is not a thing, and pagan survivals. So this is more the idea of symbols, ideas, imagery, archetypes that were born in a pagan era that stayed on in culture, even when, you know, Christianity took over, which I think that's also kind of obvious in a way, though he contends that maybe these specific figures aren't necessarily that in a straightforward fashion. I also like that the author made a distinction between studying whether something is pagan or not from a purely historical point of view and from a religious one, i.e. the approach might be different whether you're a historian or a scholar of religions, because something could still be pagan in a religious sense if you understand paganism as being a nature-based religion, and, you know, distinct from the Abrahamic biblical religions, and whether or not something is pagan in a historical sense, which obviously stops at a certain point in European history. I mean, it's a valid, useful, and important distinction because it then allows for more nuance in these types of discussions and analyses. It's an engaging and interesting read, though, I mean, it wasn't entirely what I was expecting, I guess, and like I said, I would have appreciated even more specifically folklore about these figures and less writing about the discipline of folklore studies, but So for me, this was a solid 7 to 7.5 out of 10 read. Like I said, check this out if this is your thing. Otherwise, it might just be a bit too niche, I think. Then I read another book I purchased when I was in London in September. The Magic of Mushrooms, written by Sandra Lawrence, published by Kew Gardens. This is a book about mushrooms. Well, it's a book about mushrooms in folklore, culture, human religion, and traditional medicine, yes. And it was a lovely book, because I like mycology. I mean, it's not strictly speaking mycology, it's more ethno-mycology, but it's my thing. I like mushrooms. Fungi are fun. This is a beautifully illustrated book, for one thing. You have all these lovely plates of different kinds of mushroom, and also some pictures of, like, I don't know, art depicting mushroom in culture and folklore, like these kinds of illustrations. Would I have enjoyed more straightforward biology? Yes, I would have. That being said, I also love folklore and mythology, so I wasn't going to complain too much either. The book is divided in different thematic parts. It starts off with, you know, an opening chapter presenting all sorts of different fungi, and then it kind of goes into specific species of mushrooms, molds, etc. So I like that blend of general and specific, and so you have illustrations for specific kinds of mushrooms, and it gives you stories from, yeah, different mythologies from around the world, folklore from the Middle Ages or the early modern period, and then information from traditional medicine, though the author makes sure to point out that probably, you know, don't try this at home if you're not an expert in mushrooms, because many mushrooms can and will kill you as well. If you like shrooms, and the interaction between the natural world and human culture. Yeah, definitely picked this one up. Also, I discovered that this author wrote a similar book published by Kew Gardens, lavishly illustrated, I'm going to assume, about just plants. And it's called The Witch's Garden, so yes, I'll definitely be getting that one at some point in the future. And then back at the beginning of January, because this is kind of between straight up nonfiction and fiction, I read a memoir, The Penguin Lessons, written by Michell. This was a gift from a friend because she was aware I'd read memoirs about friendships between humans and corvids, parrots and owls, but I had nothing for penguins, and we both like penguins, so she remedied that, so thank you. And this was lovely. It's not the best memoir of this kind I've read. I mean, my heart still goes to Alex and Me, or even Corvus, written by Esther Wolfson. I would definitely recommend those if you haven't read them, and if you like Beebs. So, an Englishman who went to work as a teacher in South America in, if I remember correctly, yes, Argentina. So he went to work in Argentina as a teacher in the 1970s during a time of political instability. I learned a fair bit about Argentinian history and somewhat broader South American, or I mean Eastern South American history in this book. So I mean, that was interesting. It wasn't what I was most interested in, but I still learned stuff, and that's always a good thing in my book. And this man then, during a break in time, went on vacation on the coast in Uruguay, and he came across, I mean, it's actually, it's a horrible image, it's tragic, I don't know, what do you call a group of penguins? A colony? A small colony of penguins that had been caught in an oil spill, basically all dead, suffocated by the oil, except for one penguin. And so he saw this bird and he took pity on it and he brought it back to his, it wasn't a hotel, but a flat, or I mean, an apartment. He was not renting, but someone had lent him the use of an apartment, and he decided he was going to save, or I mean, try and save this penguin's life and clean it up, etc. And then when he went back to the beach to release this penguin, it wouldn't go back into the ocean. It just kind of stuck by his side. So he was like, what do I do now? So he decided to take the penguin back with him to Argentina and take care of it. He kept it on the grounds of this boarding school he worked at in Argentina outside of Buenos Aires. And he wrote a story about this. I mean, it's a real life story about his relationship with this penguin called Juan Salvador. I rated this a 6.5 out of 10 and not more because there wasn't that much there either. I thought the author could have taken an opportunity to talk about penguins in more detail. He does talk a fair bit, like I said, about Argentinian history. I mean, the history he lived through in the 1970s, and then talks about his experience living with gauchos for a while as well, and just traveling in South America and encountering people there. It was interesting, but I wanted penguins. So it was a bit light, I guess, in terms of main focus material, but what was there was very heartwarming. The compassion this man showed towards this bird is heartwarming, and the dignity and soul he acknowledged in this non-human animal was, I mean, that shit just gets to me right here. And then he talks about how students at the boarding school he worked at befriended the penguin as well. The penguin even really helped a boy who was struggling to boost his self-esteem and just open up. So all of that was just lovely and additional proof that, you know, non-human animals have a soul, essentially. That's how I choose to put it. I mean, if you like this kind of story, you like animals and birds, I would definitely not recommend it. I think it's a bit lighter than other memoirs I've read on this kind of topic story, but still I would recommend it because, like I said, fluffy dinosaurs all day every day, even those that can't fly and only swim. Now on to the fiction. So rewinding back to November of 2022, I did in fact end up finishing How High We Go in the Dark, written by Sequoia Nagamatsu, which I read as part of my first ever Ursula K. Le Guin Prize for Fiction reading challenge. It did in fact end up being the best of the nominees I read for that challenge, you know, apart from the one I think should have won, Elder Race, written by Adrian Tchaikovsky. How High We Go in the Dark is essentially an apocalyptic story. Permafrost melts, old as fuck virus gets released and a shit ton of people start dying left, right, and center. The structure's a bit weird, and I think it's because of the structure that has been compared to Cloud Atlas, because essentially there isn't one straightforward narrative or a set of main characters. Each chapter basically takes a side character from the previous chapter and does a new little story with it, so all the chapters are kind of like related, very short stories within the novel. I didn't really care about the characters specifically. I don't think that was the point of the book. Neither really was the plot. I think it was interesting and engaging and moving because of its theming, because the novel is essentially all about death, loss, grief, and how we deal with grief as individuals and as societies. So it's heavy going at times. I shed a few tears here and there actually whilst I was reading the book. There's a chapter involving a talking pig that broke my heart. There's a chapter about a theme park where people bring their children to be euthanized. It's kind of fucked in the head. Is it the best exploration of death and grief I've ever seen? No, but I think this theme was executed well enough. It would have been a 7 out of 10, except the final chapter of this book broke it. Majorly broke it. It brought it down to 6.5 out of 10. So I mean, it's pretty telling that of all the nominees I read for the first ever Ursula K. Le Guin Prize for Fiction, the best I read was still only a 6.5 out of 10. I mean, I'm not going to spoil the ending. Let's just say that, yes, this story can be classified as science fiction, sort of, though this virus is a bit weird, and there's also a chapter that's a bit weird with afterlife type stuff. I think that never got explained. So science fiction, peri-apocalyptic light pandemic story. But because of that last chapter, I think you could call it what I'm going to term magical science fiction, i.e. a cross between science fiction and magical realism. That last chapter was just, what are you doing, mate? Why? It was just bad. There was no proper setup at all for what happens there, for that climax, for that twist. And what's worse, it cheapened the reasonably impactful and well executed theming around death and grief. So, okay, would I recommend it? It's a fat maybe, I guess. But nothing more than that. So after that, I read something that served as a delightful palate cleanser. And ooh, did I need that palate cleanser. I read Daughter of the Blood, written by Anne Bishop. This is the first book in the Black Jewels trilogy, I believe, and I will read the entire trilogy at some point. This was recommended by a friend, and okay, so how do I class this? It's not fancy erotica yet, but it's very steamy romance, fantasy, kind of. The premise is you have this society that has witches and warlocks. Are they called warlocks? I can't even remember. It doesn't matter. There's a magic system involving blood and gemstones, and like the warlocks and witches live a very long time, but you also have demons and undead people that are kind of vampiric. The world building is kind of not very well defined at all so far. It's quite blurry, hazy, so yeah. And they're all waiting for this child to be born that will be not a witch, but witch with a capital W. Kind of like this prophesied queen, high priestess. And so there is this character, I can't even remember her freaking name, who will be witch, and two male characters kind of fall in love with her. Major content warning, there's some majorly problematic elements in this story of like, it's the trope of the old soul in a child's body. There's no actual very ethically wrong sex that takes place. I want to reassure everyone about that, but still the ethics of like the falling in love with the young person because I'm gonna wait until she's an adult. It's a bit meh as a trope. There's also a thing with like gender dynamics because the women in this society are superior to the men, kind of, but it's because the men can be violent, so they're kept in check so they don't hulk out and kill everyone or rape people. I guess I'm not entirely clear about that. And so some of the dudes are kind of kept as slaves and sex slaves, and like they have rings on their junk to keep them in line. I know it sounds BDSM-y, but it's only in the lightest way possible. It's not actual erotica yet. It's very steamy though, and kind of edgy in its imagery, because there's a lot of imagery to do with demons and witches and blood magic and spiders and spider webs and using spider webs to see into the future. I mean, I liked the imagery, actually. I really liked it. It was witchy, edgy in a way that was entertaining and quite appealing, like blood, spiders, witches, yay. This is the funny thing though. There was a point where I was like, there should be more sex in this. I guess it was set up in such a way that it put me in the mood for fucking fancy erotica. Never in a million years would I have expected that. I have read erotica in the past, but then I've avoided it because triggering reminds me of my ex stuff, etc. But with this, I was like, you know what? This actually needs more sex. So we'll see if there is more sex in books 2 and 3. But book 1 is steamy. It's steamy romance, fantasy. It's edgy as fuck. I mean, but edgy not in an offensive way, just edgy in its like dark imagery. Yes, there are problematic elements, but what are you gonna do? I mean, it was a 6.5 out of 10, but I mean, it's not bad. So it was decent fun, and we'll see what I make of books 2 and 3 at some point in the future. Though still this year, if you want to check it out. Who am I to tell you to do otherwise? And then, I'm pretty sure, yeah, it's the only book I read in December. I read Weaveworld, written by Clive Barker, and this was the 5th and last book that my ex David had picked for my 2022 TBR. And just because of that fact, it's a bit hard for me actually to read it and finish it. That being said, I enjoyed the novel. I thought I would do a review for it, but in the end I was way too burnt out. And the thing is, because I was so burnt out, I didn't enjoy this novel as much as I thought I was going to. I think I would probably enjoy it more were I to reread it, and I might do that one day. Though I still rated it at a 7 out of 10, a very solid 7 out of 10, but I feel like I should have enjoyed it more than that. It's my first ever Clive Barker. I'm absolutely willing to read other things by that author because I really enjoyed his prose. It vaguely reminded me of McEwan in tone, perhaps not so much vocabulary choice. Something there just appealed to my McEwan fanness. Weaveworld tells the story of the Weaveworld, which is basically another world dimension that's trapped in a carpet, like a beautiful, magically woven carpet, and it deals with the kind. Is that what they're called in the novel? Again, apologies for my absolute crap memory, but burnout. And those people are basically supposed to be the beings who then inspired fairies, angels, genies, I mean all the magical peoples of human folklore and mythology. You don't really get hard answers as to where they come from. I mean a bit, but not really. They used to coexist with humans, but then something bad happened and they had to hide away from the world in this magical carpet. And you have people who want to help them, humans who want to help them, and you know, a plot unfolds from that basic premise. It deals with storytelling in a way, with dreams, but dreams of a paradise, of a perfect world, you know, the world of childhood imagination, or I mean the world of poetic, creative imagination, where anything is possible, where everything is beautiful and mysterious and magical. But then because of that, it also deals with memory in a way. I mean, on the one hand, you have memory of a place that might never have existed or existed in the collective unconscious of human beings, but also memory of one's life and of the moments in one's life where things were kind of like magical and wonderful. Now, I think the major idea here is small childhood, but I don't really vibe with that idea. Just, yeah, the good moments of life, those moments where everything comes together and everything feels magical. I acknowledge there was quite a bit of poetry and, well, precisely magic in this story, but something didn't quite connect. Also, the thing is, and I don't think I would really change my mind about this, something about the world building just felt incomplete to me. I think that was done by design, and fair enough, but they were not quite holes, but just missing elements, so it didn't come alive enough for me to properly engage with it. The characters were quite interesting. I didn't care that much about them, but they were definitely interesting characters, especially on the antagonist side of the equation. Like I said, I enjoyed the prose, and that novel contains one of the most beautifully written lovemaking scenes I've ever read in my goddamn life, so major points for that alone, to be honest. There was some very effective body horror, and I mean, Clive Barker, I believe, is known as a horror writer primarily, so I guess that makes sense. Yeah, some like, whoa, what the fuck is that? It reminded me of some of the stuff from Silent Hill 2, funnily enough. Also, a properly terrifying angelic being, maybe a minor spoiler, sorry about that, but it's like, make angels scary again, because they're terrifying in the Bible, and the author did exactly that. It was fucking terrifying, as it should be. So, again, kudos. And again, it was a bit difficult for me to just read this novel and finish it, because it was the last pick from my ex for my 2022 TBR, and yeah, there's a lot of pain there still for me. Especially since, for me, the ending of the novel felt like a message from him, and that was weird and very painful. I mean, moving but painful, so I don't really know what to make of it overall. It was a 7 out of 10, but it just, to me, it should be more, and in a way it felt less as well, so that's why I settled on that rating. I would definitely recommend it, though. Just feel like that novel deserved better from me interacting with it, so maybe I'll reread it one day. Who knows? And like I said, I'll definitely read something else by Clive Barker at some point in the future. Now, the first novel I read this year was Feral Creatures, written by Kira Jane Buxton. This is the sequel to Hollow Kingdom, a very new all-time favorite work of SFF. I read it last year and it absolutely blew me away. I adored it. It was a 10 out of 10 read, and this was a brilliant sequel. Not quite as good. This was a 9 out of 10 for me, but oh, the writing was just amazing once again. I mean, just the theming around nature and humans in relationship to nature and balance and the cycles of life and death and love and community. And I felt all the feels and I shed all the tears. But it wasn't quite as good in... Well, no, I can't say much about the sequel because that would be spoiling book 1. But let's just say I felt like the theming around humans with the natural world wasn't quite as perfectly balanced as I found it in book 1. So I was like, I don't quite agree there. Because I was like, defending humans just a wee bit more. That's always a red flag to when I interact with these kinds of themes. I know I'm a basket case, but I mean, it's still a 9 out of 10, so if you loved Hollow Kingdom and were feeling a bit about the sequel, fret not. It is absolutely worth it, so do pick it up. I don't know if there'll be a book 3. There might be, but I'm like, can we leave it on a good note once again? I'm always scared now with sequels. You'll understand why in a few seconds, so I'm gonna be confident. Like, I'm sure Ms. Buxton can pull it off, but I'm just always scared now with like sequels and continuations that aren't initially planned. But then again, ST is an amazing Crow character, and I will read any and all of his adventures in the future. And so the reason now, I mean, no, it kind of just confirms why I've become wary about long series in SFF, or rather series that weren't originally series becoming series in SFF, whether it's in TV or literature, because then I read this. Children of Memory, written by Adrian Tchaikovsky, and I did like it. It was a huge disappointment, holy shit. If you were somehow not aware, this is book 3 of the now Children of Time trilogy, and I adored Children of Time. It's an old-time science fiction favorite of mine. I thoroughly enjoyed Children of Ruin. I didn't like it quite as much as Children of Time, but it was still like a 7.5 out of 10. Yes, well, I'll keep my rating for the end of this little segment. What the fuck happened? I can't really say much of anything, right? Because, I mean, it's the third book in a trilogy. If you want more details about exactly what made me lose my shit over this, you can check my review on Goodreads. What I can say is there is a new uplifted species in book 3 that I was very much looking forward to because they're meant to be super evolved corvids. So crows, ravens, I hated them. Or, I mean, it was just like, what are you doing, mate? They did not feel like corvids. They didn't even feel really like birds. It's just, no, because you got super intelligent spiders and octopuses and what the... I can't say much, but basically, as vertebrates, birds should not be that much different to human beings, apes. Like, we have similar neurological structures, we have a prefrontal cortex, birds have a nidopallium. Not that different in the grand scheme of life on Earth. species descended from life on Earth. If spiders and octopuses can develop compassion for human beings and develop relationships, then the corvids in this book should not have been the way they are written. I didn't like the structure of this book either. It is very, very, very confusing. There is a reason for that, I just don't think it's a good enough reason. That also meant the pacing was a bit wonky in places, but really the structure itself, it's like, what is happening? I mean, I was trying to guess, so if you like mysteries, I guess you can get something out of the structure, but still, needlessly complicated. Now, there's a reason for that, but the reason to me felt like a poorly executed M. Night Shyamalan movie twist, and I mean, even he doesn't always land his own twists in his own movies. And as to the theming, well, the thing is, we really, in this volume, moved away from speculative evolutionary zoology, which is what I adored primarily in Children of Time and Children of Ruin. And here was just like, okay, 2 minutes spent on the corvids and then we're done. And then after that, it dealt with the nature of consciousness a lot. And then another thing that I can't mention because that would be spoiling the plot. So sorry about that. Again, if you want more details, you can check my Goodreads review. And now it's just like, what is this theming? I thought it was needlessly abstract and just full of itself in a way, and it just convoluted and presented things in a way that meant I didn't care. Because there's a main character that proposes something, but because of the nature of that main character and the nature of the thing being proposed, I was like, are you seriously expecting me to feel anything here, mate? This is stupid. Or I mean ridiculous. It was ridiculous to me. It was just too much. I mean, I know I'm sounding very ranty, but it was just so disappointing. It wasn't even garbage, like it was still, so that's my rating for this book. It was still a 5.5 out of 10, but like coming from the 8.5 out of 10 of Children of Time, it's like, what? And this is precisely why I've become wary of series that overstay their welcome, that haven't fully been conceptualized as series from the get-go. I don't know, like, what was this book? Did it need more editing? I'm not entirely sure more editing would have saved it either. I mean, I really don't know, but this was a massive flop. I don't think it really takes away from the brilliance of Children of Time, because I mean, Children of Time and Children of Ruin both kind of function as standalones in any case. I mean, you do kind of need to read Children of Time to read and understand Children of Ruin, but you can just read Children of Time, and it is absolutely brilliant, and I stand by that. But wow, Children of Memory is not worth your time. Just straight up, just don't read it. I mean, if you absolutely must know how things kind of continue, though in a largely disconnected way at the end of the day, have at it. But otherwise, I would just straight up not recommend it. Don't bother with this one. And then finally in January, I reread Atonement, written by Ian McEwan. Reread 15 years after the first time I read it. And it was a very enjoyable reread. I feel like I felt I enjoyed it more 15 years ago. Now it's a 7.5 out of 10, but again, that's a very good rating. If you're not familiar with the story, you basically have this girl called Bryony. She's at home from school during the summer on this nice estate from like the upper British class between the two world wars. It starts like 3 years before the opening of World War II. Her sister is back from college, from university as well. And basically there's also this young man who is this family's child lady's son, and he was sponsored by the father in this family to go to grammar school and then go to university. He's a very, very gifted young man, like intellectually gifted, very intelligent, has a bright, promising future ahead of him. He's been best friends with Bryony's older sister, Cecilia, since they were children, and well, they're young adults now. They're in love with one another. And Bryony is a strange child. She's very self-centered. I mean, I know a lot of children are self-centered, but like, I think she's a bit more than your average kid, and very prone to fantasy because fantasy in the sense of fantasizing about things, because she wants to be a writer. That's her hobby. She writes stories. She wrote a play during the summer, and so she wants to be an author. And she's always coming up with these stories in her head. And so everything she experiences to her is fodder for stories she can then write. And she witnesses something between her sister, and so her sister's would-be boyfriend, and something happens during that summer at her house, and it fundamentally changes the life of her sister and her sister's, I'm gonna call him boyfriend, in a very tragic way. And from what I've understood, I mean, I've only read one other story by Ian McEwan on Chesil Beach last year. That's kind of Ian McEwan's thing. It seems to be the basic premise of most of his stories, that basically characters' lives get fundamentally altered because of one specific event / encounter. That seems to be his thing, because that's kind of what happens in On Chesil Beach, and it's definitely what happens here. And here it's, well, I mean, actually, in On Chesil Beach, it's quite sad, perhaps not tragic as such. Here it's tragic. This is a tragedy in a way. It's not a love story, but there is a love story in here, and a tragedy that revolves around it via this character, Bryony. And it's called Atonement because that is one of the main themes of this story. What do you do to atone for your sins? Bryony doesn't commit a crime, but she definitely commits a sin in a way, and she has to find a way to atone for it. With regards to Atonement specifically, I do want to praise this novel because it does delve into the theme of atoning for one's sins, of atonement, brilliantly. Like, it's a near perfectly executed theme. It's kind of nice to see a novel that just takes its title and commits to it. And then of course you have Ian McEwan's prose. I really do enjoy his writing style. I mean, his characters, I still think the character work is kind of missing something. That's what I felt with On Chesil Beach. A bit less so here, but I mean, the character work is what it needs to be essentially, as though it's not the deepest for general fiction in my opinion, but okay, that's fine. So this is interesting. That's one of the major differences I noticed. The story, the plot itself felt more contained this time around. Perhaps not quite constrained, but it really does focus on like these 3 parts, 3 episodes, and I thought it was a bit larger than that for some reason. But so yeah, you have part 1 that takes place at this house in the summer, you have part 2, part 3, and then it ends. And what's also interesting is that I did remember absolutely loathing this character, this child character, or I mean child character, very, very young teen. She's like 13 years old at the beginning of the story. This character, Bryony, I hated her the first time I read this book. And I still hated her this time around. I mean, I'm not a fan of child characters as is. And as a child, she is, I don't know if innocent is quite the right word, but she's not responsible for her actions in the way an adult is. However, and my mother definitely agrees with me about this because she also read the book, not every 13-year-old would do what she did. And this is also said actually by the main male character of the story, Robbie, so Cecilia's boyfriend. And I'm like, I wouldn't have done that as a kid, personally. You done fucked up there. But beyond that, I just do not like her personality. She just annoyed the crap out of me, so that was kind of fun. Well, I mean, fun. It was an interesting similarity between both reading experiences. Also, as an FYI, yes, I have seen the movie. I saw it presumably 15 years ago. I think I saw the movie first, and I love the movie. Again, it just kind of like hits you right here. The novel hits you right here. I mean, it's a tragedy, like I said, and so I was like, just... Yep. And I will say this, the movie is an excellent adaptation, actually. So if you want good book-to-movie adaptations, Atonement counts. I think it's a near one-to-one adaptation, actually, except for the very end. But otherwise, I would recommend both. I would recommend the movie. Well, I mean, first I would recommend the novel and then recommend the movie. But, so yes, that was a very positive rereading experience. I will endeavor to do 2 technically end-of-the-year videos. I should have done a lot earlier. I wasn't sure I was just, going to go ahead and do them, but I do want to do them because I need my routines and my little traditions within this little space. So I will do a tier list for like all the books I read in the second half of 2022 as a kind of intro segue into my 2022 reading wrap-up. Also in February, I am reading the Book of the New Sun written by Gene Wolfe, and so far I'm enjoying it with some caveats. And apart from that, I mean, will I read another novel in February? I'm not sure. We'll see. Also, as a friendly reminder, there is a Discord server attached to this channel. I am on Discord basically every day. So if you want to discuss books there, you're more than welcome. Thank you for the continued support despite my very long absence. I really do appreciate it. So on that note, I wish you all a lovely day, evening, whichever time of day you prefer. Do take good care of yourselves, and I shall see you all reasonably soon in the next video. But until then, bye-bye.